Hi, welcome to Swishing Mindsets. I'm Anuradha and I'm speaking to Regina Link. Regina is a Taiwanese American author and illustrator who combines East Asian philosophies of Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism with Chinese brush painting in stories that appeal to children as well as adults. So, hi, Regina.
Hi there, Anu. How are you?
I'm great. Good to talk to you. And
Yes, likewise.
yeah, and I guess we should start talking about the Oxherd Boy. So that was a bestseller that
Sure.
released in 2024, followed by Big Enough, and
hmm
again an award-winning book, and which is going to be now followed up with a sequel called Little Helper, right?
Yes,
Which
that's
is
correct.
releasing in May 2026. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
super
let
exciting time.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I've seen, like I was saying, I couldn't go through your entire book, but I've gone because I couldn't get it here. But I've gone through excerpts, I've gone through your website, I've seen so much of it. And there are such deep messages in there, besides the exquisite painting that I can see. So, and I'm sure it's a book meant for children and parents and everybody else as well.
hmm
So tell me
hmm
about the Oxford Boy because I believe it started with as an Instagram webcomic, right?
Yes, that's correct. So,
Yeah.
I grew up in the States. I was born in Texas to Taiwanese immigrants, and growing up in the U.S., I did, straddle this kind of third culture in between East and West, and a lot of my Chinese or Taiwanese upbringing through my parents really reflected the Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucian values that my parents grew up with too. And so they kind of brought that over to the US, and I was raised in that environment. But then I also absorbed a lot of Western American culture as well. And so when, as an adult, I don't know, I think I was maybe 35 when I had the opportunity to move to Taiwan with my son, who was 4 at the time, and my husband was there as well. And going to Taiwan and immersing myself in a completely different culture, learning a lot of the arts and the philosophies and the religions that really just permeate everyday living was such a unique experience. And so I wanted to invest more time in that. And so I started taking Chinese brush painting lessons. I started reading a lot more of the classic texts and visiting a lot of the temples and just learning as much as I could because the opportunity was there. And my son at the time was also at an age in which he was just curious about a lot of things. Like he was asking about like, where does my reflection go when I walk away from the mirror? Is that where people go when they die too? And just like all of these very strange but existential questions. And the Oxford Boy really started as a very regular artistic practice for me. So um, being both, working and raising a child at the same time, there wasn't, if I didn't have a regularly scheduled painting practice, there was no way I was ever going to fit it in. I could always put it off. Oh, I'll do it over the weekend or whatever. And so the Oxford Boy starting on Instagram was my way of saying, hey, every week you're just going to put a sketch out there. You're going to create this little conversation inspired by some kind of question that my son, posed to me. And it just started from there where I created these three characters who represented the three Chinese philosophies, and they would just talk to each other, talk through some of these topics that my son was also curious about. And it took off from there. I think people were also very curious, or at least just interested in what these characters had to say about some of these subjects. And in the end, the collection became the Oxford Boy book. And as a result, also because the illustrations, I think, did appeal to kids, I was able to work with my publishers to create children's book inspired by those characters as well. So that's basically how it unfolded, and it's been really interesting to see how the world has grown and encompassed, as you said, both young readers and adult audiences too.
Yeah, I want to just read out, some of, some quotes from your book. Like one
Sure.
is, if you want to be whole, first let yourself be broken, right?
Hmm.
Then, when you care, you find the courage to do great things. Very simple, but very powerful, right? Then,
Sure.
then there's, I have too tender a heart, sighed the ox. I'm sorry, replied the Oxford boy. I do believe for the world is better off for it. So these are really big ideas, and you put it so simply. And tell me, how is it when a child is reading this book? What
Hmm.
was in your mind? And your son sounds like a very wise boy. So, did you have these conversations?
He's an old soul, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think older than all of us looks like. But concepts like this, like if you want to be whole, first let yourself be broken. And I understand that in today's day and age where life is, sometimes it feels like such a struggle, right? You need to know these things, you need to build resilience. And it's wonderful if, these things can be communicated as early as possible, to children.
Hmm.
What was your intent? And when you're reading with your son, with other children, what do you find?
So it is interesting because I do think that children are very different, and depending on their development, their age, their interests, they're going to focus on different aspects of the story, whether it's in the children's books like Big Enough or Little Helper, or in the Oxford Boy, which I think is a little bit more mature. But so let's say take the Oxford Boy and some of these concepts about oh, like I'm like being too sensitive for a very sometimes harsh world, and whether or not that is a weakness. And I do think that when you take a simple feeling like, oh, I'm too sensitive. Someone told me, like, oh, I shouldn't be crying, or I should get over it. It's not that big of a deal. These are things that I think kids hear a lot because they haven't lived through a lot of things that have given them the chance to become as resilient as, let's say, a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old. And so, what to us looks like they're having a meltdown over a very tiny thing, for them, it is a very big deal because they haven't had the chance to exercise that muscle of resilience just yet. And so when you take a feeling like that and you present it to a child, I think that they can identify with that feeling. They can say, I'm not the only one who has strong feelings and strong emotions that maybe I feel like I shouldn't have. And to have a child and an ox have that conversation, it makes it less personal. It makes it, it takes that conversation and puts it out there so you can think about it. It's not about you. It's this conversation between two friends. And so it becomes less scary. The boy is very comforting. He says, you have a tender heart, but that's not necessarily a weakness. The world is better for people who do have tender hearts. And he doesn't go into explaining why, but as an adult reading this with a child, there is an opportunity to say, well, why would a world be better off if you have a sensitive heart, a compassionate heart? And it becomes an opportunity, like a gateway through which a conversation between an adult and a child can happen. So that's something that I hope to kind of foundationally and like create opportunities for conversation without actually explaining, what it is that I hope people are taking away from it, because I think, like, as a reader, you might take different things away from the same pages. So mostly, I hope to create opportunities for discussion between adults and kids through the
Yeah,
Oxford
I think
Boy.
it's because a great thing that you're pointing out, because a lot of time these books are read aloud, with an adult and a child together. You read these, especially picture books, as you call them.
Hmm.
You read it together. So this is a great thing that you've not spelt out why and what, but it's a great
Hmm.
way to spark a conversation. And
Right,
he
right.
said it's a gateway, because the child may ask or may not ask, but then the parent can ask questions. Ki, why do you
Hmm.
think so? Or,
Yes, yes,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
What do you think would happen? Why is he saying this? That, he thinks it's not a good thing to have a sensitive heart
Hmm.
or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Really
Hmm.
nice. So the Oxford boy, I'm just saying, it's basically a young boy, his family ox, and a rabbit that live in the garden, right? They are
Hmm.
having these
Yes.
conversations.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So the Oxford Boy, I try to channel a lot of perspectives from Taoism. The Ox will share Buddhist concepts and then Confucianism, and is kind of channeled more through the rabbit. So the rabbit is more kind of about relationships and how do we treat each other properly and in a civilized way. And so all three of them kind of have come at life at different angles, and it's kind of through their discussion that we can surface, what is the most appropriate perspective to take in any certain situation.
Yeah. Can you explain a bit, because you've already, touched upon a little bit about Taoism, Confucianism,
Hmm.
Buddhism. So can you tell us a little bit about these approaches because they tie up very well in daily life as well, right? And practical
Hmm.
aspects. So a little bit, can you just introduce listeners to,
Okay.
how it has influenced you or how have you used it in your book or whatever, a little bit about these
Uh-huh.
philosophies.
Right, right, sure. So mentioned a little bit about Confucianism, and so Confucianism, a lot of it is about, how our one-on-one relationships work. So whether it's like from a perspective of like a child and a parent, what does the child owe to the parent? What does the parent owe to the child? Similarly, a husband and a wife, or the government and its subjects. So a lot of these are kind of one-on-one relationships, and what does a healthy relationship look like? And then so the boy is more of a Taoist philosophy, so not looking at things from black and white, but rather, black and white are kind of two sides of the same coin. And the idea mostly is to be able to live harmoniously with both extremes, and as one extreme kind of changes and cycles into the next. Um, so I feel like the boy was a very good pick for this because it comes from a place of innocence where it's the non-judging mind. A child doesn't really know whether something is good or bad until they're taught that. But Taoism is all about approaching things and looking at things as they are, trying not to judge, reflecting things as we see them, and being flexible, flowing with the world and flowing with life, like a water flows through or a river flows into the sea, so in a very natural, harmonious way. And then the ox, I picked for Buddhism because, um, well, first, the ox is a very like holy symbol in Buddhism, and also I really wanted like this strong, big character, but who's also like is an animal that dedicates its life to service, and is a gentle creature who is all about working with humankind in a way that is symbolic in the relationship that it has with people. And so Buddhism is kind of about suffering, not, I mean, suffering, pain, suffering, but also that suffering being the root of our ability to feel compassion towards one another. And so those are the three aspects of the different characters, and so how it sort of unfolds in life really is, in one opportunity, you might encounter some very difficult, uh, you know, development in your life, whether that's a rupture in a relationship or, a sense of lost trust. And there is this aspect in which, there is a moment of grief and suffering and immense sadness, which I think for um, you can identify more with the ox and what he has to say about life, the recognition of the pain that we feel in life. But then, like the ox is relating with the boy who represents, this Taoist philosophy where, yes, there are dark moments in our lives, and there are times in which we don't feel like we're operating in a world that seems designed to you know, go against the values that we hold dear. But at the same time, there are opportunities for us to be resilient, to flow with the challenges that are presented to us, and to still create our own, aspects of lightness, of love within the darkness. Which then, relates back to the rabbit. It was like, okay, like, this moment of intense suffering then becomes the fuel through which I can actually relate better with the people around me, with myself, with the society that I'm living in. How can I actually change this suffering into a reason to do better? And so all of that, I think, should work together to motivate us towards, becoming self-reliant, not only just more self-reliant and resilient, but also, work with what we have to, make things better for whether it's ourselves, our families, our society. And so, um, I would say, yeah, that's how I see these three characters working together in the everyday reflection of what we do.
Yeah, that's beautiful, especially what you're saying that, you're learning that suffering can translate into having more compassion for people, right?
Hmm.
And more joy eventually, I suppose. So tell me, even, I mean, although you said you grew up in a Taiwanese household and, you were familiar with
Hmm.
these concepts, it took going to Taiwan to really immerse yourself in this.
Right.
I'm guessing it did something for you as well. So did it affect you, being so much in touch with this and does it reflect on your life in any way, how you conduct your life, how you see yourself, how you deal with situations? Has that affected you?
I think so. I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways, the philosophies, as I was learning more about them
Yeah, and
formally,
also,
it's
just to
yeah.
interject, you were part of corporate America as well, right?
Yeah.
So that's why
I
it's a
mean,
big shift, Yeah, that's why I'd like to know, like,
right,
what changed,
right.
if anything changed, yeah.
I mean, I think that a lot of the values growing up with immigrant parents, I went to school, I got good grades, I applied myself to my studies, and I got, good job opportunities after I graduated. I was very lucky to have parents who supported me through all of that. Um, I think that, after spending a number of years working, not with corporations, I was actually in the nonprofit space for, more than a decade. But in a lot of ways, my I guess my professional career did not take me to a place in which I could spend a lot of time on spiritual growth, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it. And so I would say that in starting to work on Oxherd Boy and actually taking time to pay more attention to that side of my life, um, is, it opened up a lot of opportunities for these philosophies and these ideas to really come to the forefront of my mind. Because I think that even though I grew up in a household that, taught me these values, they were basically just swimming in my subconscious. I wasn't really aware of them and or applying them with any level of awareness to my life. And so I think the biggest change, I think, in working with Oxford Boy and in moving to Taiwan and just paying more attention to these things, it's the biggest change to my life personally is simply helping me become more aware of how these philosophies and these teachings actually have a role in my everyday, whether that's you know, uh, illustrating and writing now as a career, or whether that's, in raising my kids or relating with my husband or just talking with a neighbor and things like that. I think that to bring attention and to shed light on the values and teachings that had just been floating under the surface before has been just, the biggest gift, I guess, from this project
Yeah.
to me personally.
Yeah. Any example can you give? Like, if you were dealing with your child or you were dealing with a neighbor or a stressful situation,
Mhm.
sometimes our reactions are like, all over the place or, we
Yes,
don't blow up,
yes.
So how has that changed? Has it given you pause? How do you relate now?
Oh, so let's see. I guess I guess the most I mean, yeah, I guess the most recent example really is, my family is in process of finalizing an adoption. And so we are adopting a 4-year-old girl from Taiwan. It was something that we had started when we were living there. And since moving to the US, it's taken, close to 2 years to kind of get to this point where we would actually be able to bring her home with us. And so it's going to be a huge life change when this happens.
Yeah.
Um, not just for us as parents to go from one child to two, but also, I think about my son who's, been an only child for most of his life, and he's almost 10 now, and to kind of introduce a sibling and to, balance everything with home life, work, the language between, our daughter and the rest of our family, and how she might need additional support through kind of the really the trauma of leaving the only place she's ever known and to come to a completely different environment. And all of these things that I think under normal circumstances, before I started, this working on this project, which would have completely overwhelmed me, and I probably would have emotionally like suppressed all of my anxiety in a very unhealthy way. Now I'm not saying that it doesn't still bother me or I don't feel overwhelmed anymore, but there are pockets of time in which I will simply notice myself feeling a certain way or reverting to a previous habit that probably wasn't the healthiest to deal with a stressful situation like this. Um, and really, it's just sometimes it's just noticing when these things come up, when the feelings start to take over again, and just to be able to notice that has been a huge change for me. Because when I start to notice things, that's kind of the window of opportunity to say either like, okay, like, I need to step back and take a break, or I need to get outside. I need to feel myself in my body and get out of my head. There's a chance to go in a different direction. And I'm not always successful, but I'm more successful than I used to be. And and I think that just makes all the difference. You just start exercising that muscle of putting pause, in the places where you need them most.
Yeah. And you have a tool now in your hand to deal with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
That's
exactly.
fantastic. But 2 years is a long time to wait to bring your daughter home. So you can understand, the ups and downs, the highs and lows.
Yes,
Yeah.
very, very, very much an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wonderful you're dealing with it, and I hope you can bring her home soon.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're excited to gonna move on to that next step.
Yeah. So tell me, you also learned the ancient craft of gongbi, right? That's the brush paint
Yes.
you've used in the book. So how do you do it?
Hmm.
Like, what's the process? Do you do it digitally or do you create it first by hand and then transfer it? How does it work? And why did
Yeah,
you choose
so
this in the first place? Yeah.
oh, okay. Yeah, so I guess I can answer that question first. The I guess when I was young, I was always, doodling or, kind of interested in sketching, but it was never something that I really enjoyed taking classes on. It was. it was funny because in every other academic area, I was totally fine with direct instruction. But when it came to art, I was just like, no, I don't want to do practice. I don't want to, work with a teacher or anything. This is just for fun. And so I was basically that way up until, I don't know, my late 20s. And then I did start taking some Western oil painting classes just online, and I was doing it for fun. But then when I was in Taiwan, uh, there was just a huge opportunity to learn these kind of ancient crafts. And I was taking a Mandarin class, like a language class in kind of this university district. And all around, there were just so many traditional Chinese painting studios. And so one day I just picked one and I signed up for a class, and they were this particular painting style, gongbi, is it's like more than 2,500 years old. It started in the Han Dynasty and kind of became more and more refined throughout the Tang and the Song Dynasty, when there was kind of this golden age of arts and culture. And the art style really appealed to me. There are some Chinese painting styles that's like looser. It's kind of like this black and white, almost Zen-like quality. But it's very like ink and water, a lot of negative space and things like that. And like, I don't know, I think art needs to appeal to people's personality types. And so, you mentioned like, being coming from like this like corporate environment, and that was totally me. I'm like type A, like I'm definitely not like loosey goosey, like, oh, let me just like let the art move through me in a very natural way. Like that was not me at all. But Gombi was actually like a lot more structured and contained, very detail oriented, very slow. And personality wise, that appealed to me a lot more. So it's very similar to, I would say, even like graphic novels or comics, where you start with sketches and then you go over it with ink, ink outlines, and then you add the color, layers of color inside. So it was very much like, don't color outside of the lines, like very methodical and systematic. And it appealed to my personality a lot more. And that's kind of the art form that I started with. But now, with my books, I do it digitally. So I learned with the traditional medium of, like making your own pigments and mixing your own colors and ink and everything like that. But since moving back to the States, it's been a lot harder to find the materials to create these traditional paintings with, and just the quality of the materials that you would buy online just it was not consistent enough
Yeah,
for
yeah.
my purpose. And so I spent the better part of a year and a half trying to recreate, not necessarily recreate, but at least like recreate the effect of traditional gombi painting on the iPad, using an app called Procreate. And it took a while, and I would say that it's still not quite the same. And even the experience of painting on an iPad is definitely very different than working with traditional media. But it's also just been like very freeing to be able to work on these illustrations from really anywhere. So the portability of being able to take my work into a digital environment has been really great, at least for now. But I think that, if I ever find myself in a place where I can get materials to keep doing traditional painting, that would be wonderful.
What are the materials that you need? Are these easily available? What are the pigments? Are they made of natural materials, or is it just modern paints that you use for this?
Yeah, so it depends. I think for like the ink work, it's better to use kind of the traditional ink sticks that then you add water and you have an ink well and you make it yourself. But you know, there are alternatives in which like you can get them like pre-bottled. And then you can also use like just regular watercolors for the coloring portion. But you can also, you know, order you know, natural pigments in powder form and then mix it yourself using different you know, liquid formulas, solvents basically. And then, but one of the hardest things is actually the paper itself. So depending on the quality of the paper, you could end up with ink or watercolor that ends up being absorbed like a sponge, and that's not what you want in gongbi. You want things to kind of stay contained within the lines, right?
Yeah,
And so it's really hard to know the quality of the paper and what the paper is going to do when you paint without actually seeing it and testing it and feeling it. And sometimes instead of using paper, you can actually stretch a piece of silk onto a wooden frame, and that also becomes kind of the canvas. It's not that you can't get them anywhere else, but it's just hard
it's just
to
harder. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, navigate through the diversity of quality of materials out there.
Yeah, but I love the illustrations, the pictures, the painting-like feel, and they're very
Mhm.
serene. Even the colors are very soft.
Yes.
And they set up their entire philosophical, that
Mhm.
entire the characters are discussing. It's quite sweet, really. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I try to mimic kind of the style that you would see in a really old painting, you know, that might be in a museum or something like that. And I think it reflects the spirit of the philosophies, which are also extremely old. Um, and it kind of reflects the spirit of a lot of these Chinese paintings from before because, you know, in the Tang and Song dynasties, it was very common to pair your paintings with lines of poetry, you know, directly on the canvas itself. And so, um, you know, to bring that kind of forward into the modern age where you have illustrations that reflect the spirit of the conversations and the chats that these characters are having is a nod to that tradition as well.
Yeah. So these are almost 100 conversations, right? The characters have.
Yeah, in the book,
Yeah. In the book,
yeah,
yeah.
there's more than 100
More
of
than a
them.
hundred conversations, yeah. So I think there's a lot to learn, a lot to apply. And then there's Big Enough, right? Big Enough is the next book
Hmm.
where he feels that
Yeah,
he gets a confidence that he's big enough to bring the ox home, right? That's what it is.
correct,
Yeah, yeah.
correct.
And then there's Little Helper that's coming. Tell us a little about both the books, especially
Sure.
Little Helper that's coming out this May, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the Oxherd Boy, which is, you know, that collection that we mentioned that has more than 100 conversations, the first, I would say maybe like two or three of them became the inspiration for the book Big Enough. And it really t tells the story of how the Oxford Boy and the ox kind of become friends with each other. And so it's a story really about fear. The boy is very small, and he, like you said, he's given this responsibility of bringing the family ox home by himself for the first time, and he has to do it before the sun goes down. And along the way, he gets a lot of advice from different people, different animals about how big and scary this ox is. And so the story really is about, you know, how he becomes consumed by fear, and then what happens when he actually meets the ox, and does he actually successfully bring him home and complete his mission. And so it was really fascinating to develop this world and these characters even more, even far beyond, you know, what has been presented through just the Instagram or this collection of conversations. The children's book really gave me an opportunity to expand the art, to create these really kind of huge landscapes and to present kind of this world, this kind of ancient small Chinese village into and bring it forward and give the ox and the boy like more personality, like deeper conversations, longer conversations. And so it was so wonderful to work on. And Little Helper really is the companion book to that. So it moves beyond just the ox and the boy. It introduces a number of neighbors and friends, a cousin, his grandfather comes into the mix a little bit more. And these are all characters that already appear in the Oxherd Boy just as like, secondary characters, but they too are given, more personality. They present challenges to the boy. And the story is about the Oxford boy who, it's a beautiful day. He wants to do all these fun things with the people he loves, but because of different priorities that his friends and family have, he's not able to. And it's really a question of how do you, in a Taoist philosophy, from a Taoist philosophy, how do you flow with the obstacles that are being presented and ultimately find an opportunity to help in a way that is natural, that feels effortless, but ultimately in the story can resolve a number of issues for not only yourself, but your community as well. So, different philosophies kind of underpin each story. So Big Enough was, about fear and compassion, so more in a Buddhist lens, and then Little Helpers supported more by the Taoist philosophy of flowing with challenges in life. Yeah, so I'm really excited that for Little Helper to come out to kind of grow the Oxford Boy world in a different way, but hopefully still just enjoyable for adults and kids to
Yeah,
dive
yeah.
into.
Yeah, big ideas in a simple way, really. That's what it is.
Hmm.
Yeah, tell me, is there
Yeah.
anything in particular that you really enjoyed writing? Any panel or any part of it, you know?
In Little Helper, I
Any of
would
them, yeah,
say,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, so I guess I'll focus on Little Helper since it's the one that's coming out. Um, in Little Helper, there's a scene in which the boy and his friend Bolin are having a picnic. And they're just like their faces are like stuffed with like sticky rice and like it was just like such a fun image to create because it was so, I mean, like my son loves to eat and it was just kind of a very lighthearted image to draw and it's huge and so I could incorporate like aspects of portraiture where it's like oh focus on the expressions on the faces but I could also like kind of build out the food aspect of it and then there, since they're having a picnic outside, there was also like, this beautiful like nature scene from nature in the background. And so it incorporated a lot of different elements that were different, but, came together in a really kind of fun and friendly scene.
Yeah, sounds wonderful. But tell me, how long does it take you to, create this entire thing, you know?
For
So
a
it sounds
spread
like a
like
perfect,
that,
backdrop
yeah.
for fun, really.
Yeah. So for a scene like that, for a spread like that, I mean, it probably takes a number of weeks to just think about the idea, like think through how to compose it in a way that's engaging, thinking about what colors to use. And so it's always kind of like in the back of my mind, not necessarily where I'm dedicating a lot of time to like thinking about each one, but I'll bounce here and there between different illustrations but then when it comes down to sitting down and actually like drawing it out, it probably takes, a good week of work to from start to finish if I put it all together.
That's one panel, right?
Yeah, one
Oh.
panel. And th this is a 40
Yeah,
page
yeah, yeah.
book.
So that's one page, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'd say, yeah, I mean, put it all together, yeah, it probably takes a year. I mean, a year's
Yeah.
worth of
So it's a
work
full-time
to,
job, even being a children's author,
yeah,
especially when
it
it comes to
really is.
illustrating, writing, thinking of the idea,
Mhm.
and then
Yeah,
bringing in all the
yeah.
philosophies into it. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's not work that I feel like I do alone. especially with these children's books, it's been really wonderful to feel supported by a team of editors and art directors and people who, they support the creative work and they really want to um, bring forward the things that make it unique. But at the same time, they also present other perspectives and ideas, and they're not afraid to question certain decisions that I make. And it's been very different than the Oxherd Boy, because the Oxherd Boy I did primarily on my own. I and But the children's book, just because it is so long and such a large undertaking, to be able to work with a team of people who actually kind of, ask me about my decisions and force me to reflect on them a little bit more. There's pluses and minuses where, sometimes I feel like, no, I don't think you understand like my creative vision,
Yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, like, it's good for people to ask, because if somebody doesn't understand, then that means that, something is missing. And it might be that, that's it is just what it is. Or, maybe I did miss something, and maybe there is an opportunity to make it even better,
Right.
So it's definitely a balance. But I have loved, working with my team on just creating books, because I don't think I would have been able to create such beautiful books without their input and their feedback.
Yeah, I think everybody needs helpers, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So tell me, finally, Regina, who is the book for? What age?
Oh,
Children, adults? Who is it for?
sure.
Yeah.
So I think these stories are very suitable for kids, probably between the ages of like 2 all the way to 8 or 9. I think that the storyline is simple enough for a toddler to understand, but there are also layers of meaning and messages that can be understood and developed further with an older child. And so I've actually presented big enough to students who are in, sixth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade. And so these kids are probably 10 or 11 at that time. And they're still, they it's not that they're challenged to think of things that they hadn't thought of before, but it's just fun for them to be able to work with something that feels simple, but can still offer some meat to like sink their teeth into. It's not difficult to understand, but they can play with it, and it feels very, very light and very whimsical, and less like, this is a philosophy lesson. So it's
Yeah.
still like very approachable material. Yeah.
Yeah, and children love to reread, and as they grow older. So you
Yeah.
start at 2, and by the time you're 4 or 5, you're
Hmm.
having different conversations through the same book, really.
Yes, yes, yeah. I always enjoyed that as a kid.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you, Regina, so much. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, this has been such a wonderful conversation. And so yeah, I hope that uh, folks kind of just enjoy the opportunity to kind of reflect, to take in whatever philosophies they can, wherever they get them from, and find opportunities to apply them in their lives, because I mean, it's been such an enriching experience for me, and I would love for more people to have that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Regina.
Thank you too.